But he's come up with that money in his budget, which includes a hospital fee or a bed tax, whatever you want to call it. I mean, can you look at some type of tax increase or fee increase in those terms?
If we followed what his revenue estimates, including the revenue enhancements that the governor has done, and put every one of those dollars that he said, we still have a $200 million shortfall over the budget. Secondly, the trend line down is for us to go from 1.7 to $2 billion, a $2 billion shortfall by the end of the fiscal year.
I would point out
That's not. I'm sorry.
I'd point out to the executive branch that they make a recommendation. A lot of that recommendation was based on numbers that weren't even feasible with respect to the supplantation of lottery funds. So his recommendation is just that to me. I'm not going to move forward with supplanting the lottery funds. So we have to find other avenues, and we're going to move forward and do that.
And at this point, is the 4% even realistic, a 4% growth?
He hasn't shared those numbers with us yet. Maybe the governor knows something we don't.
What about pitting sort of the hospitals against the Board of Regents here? You don't want to give the 1.6%, which would be $300 million. You don't want to do that, so you're putting the burden on the Board of Regents. It's sort of the elephant in the room. The governor says just pass the 1.6, then you don't have to make the cuts to higher education. It's deep, yet you don't want to raise taxes, so the tuition will increase. And the burden
it's always easy to play one against the other. You can play one tax against the other in any sense. Our job is to find a balance that, and I think you're going to find that balance when we make our recommendation. Give us a chance to make those recommendations this week, and I don't think you're going to see $300 million or the drastic consequences.
Will there be a shift to hospitals?
Ultimately, though, remember this. The decision of how the money the General Assembly gives the Board of Regents, how that occurs, that comes about from the Board of Regents. That's not our decision. We do not micromanage. All we do is give them a pot of money and say, please give us the best possible education system you possibly can to provide us.
To specifically answer your question, I don't think we're going to substitute a sick tax on the people of Georgia for the Board of Regents or vice versa. I think they're mutually exclusive, to tell you the truth.
We'll
find other solutions.
You mentioned high salaries, but aren't a lot of those salaries contractually locked in? I mean, isn't there very little you can do to force salary cuts to people who have contracts?
Again, that is the requirement that the regents have to figure out.
I
have suggested that, and I have pushed that for one very simple reason. We're asking that sacrifices be made by the students. We're asking that sacrifices be made by the programs. All we're asking is that the regents, and they use the toolbox, will have shared sacrifice. And that if it's possible, you do that. The Chancellor has said his goal has been to raise faculty and administration to market. Well, you know very well when you are at market, and when the market contracts, industry reduces the salaries. We have the benefit of having a very dear, one of our senators is a Delta airline pilot. He's making 35% less today than he was 5 years ago. But Delta survived. Delta is prospering. But the point is it requires shared sacrifice, and the message that the presidents and that I say to the presidents and I say to the chancellor is, share that sacrifice, because I don't want it all on the backs of the students. I don't want it all on the backs of individual programs. I think it needs to be shared. And the mark of a leader is a leader makes the sacrifice first. And that's why I feel very strongly about that.
What level of tuition increase do you think is appropriate for students and their families to accept?
Once again, that is a decision of the Board of Regents. I think in the balance of everything, I think there needs to be a reasonable tuition increase that reflects the market. Our southern neighbor of Florida has gone to a 15% per year increase in tuitions. We are still significantly low on tuitions with respect to the Southern Region Education Board. I think we need to consider at least bringing our tuitions to a market-based, and at least a midpoint. Travis?
In hindsight, do y'all wish you'd given the Regents more than a few days to find $300 million in cuts?
I mean, I don't think we found the same numbers at about the same time they did. So I don't know that we're both in the same boat.
I mean, it just seems that
when we went into the budget process and the legislature started we were given an initial budget briefing, and that's where we heard first time the $300 million number. That very day, I went to see the chancellor. That was 7 weeks ago. I gave those numbers to the chancellor, and I asked the chancellor then to take steps to effectuate that. I believe Chairman Earhart, sometime after I did, but long before we had the press meeting last Tuesday, did the same thing. So they've had the numbers. They've had their numbers for almost 2 months, and then they bring it up at the last minute. I want everyone in Georgia to know that we have been conduits of this information to the chancellor, to the regents, and ask them to do this. And that they need to accept the fact that we did have those meetings. We did it privately. We did not wish to create havoc and an alarmed populace. We wanted them to know that and to figure it out.
Can you explain where this $300 million is coming from? Because it now sounds like maybe y'all are backing off of this $300 million number.
The 300 billion number was an outside estimate with respect to where the revenue numbers may have gone if, let's say, the February and March numbers looked like they were going to come in significantly less. If you remember, the February numbers last year were minus 34% at that time. We wanted to make sure we looked at the outside, the worst case scenario. Just like when you're doing your budget in your house, you say, okay, if I don't have this much money, what am I going to do? And then we'll work back from that. And we hope that they're going to be better than they
We
are.
hope they're going to be better. But if they come in February, which we probably anticipate getting early part of next week, if February comes in a very negative sense, none of us want to come back up here for a special session. And if we don't have a balanced budget, that will be what will be required. And the people of the state of Georgia do not want the General Assembly to come back up here in a special session to lower again and go through this same exercise. The budget projections that we have are based on a 20-month tracking of where the budget has gone. And for 20 months, the revenue stream of the state of Georgia has gone down, gone down, gone down. The present shortfall right now today is about $1.5 billion. That's the 2010 budget. Has a shortfall. The governor, with his revenue enhancements, all of his revenue enhancements, and his withholding of funds right now is at $1.3 billion. So that right now there's a $200 million shortfall. That what would have to happen is the state's revenue would have to go drastically up to recoup just the $200 million to hold where we are, and that includes the revenue enhancements.
We can take one last question.
So do you think that the 300 or not 300? I mean, but if there is 300 million, y'all are comfortable with the cuts that the higher education department will have to take, 300 million, whether it's 35% tuition increase or all those 7 recommendations, and whether those are the Regents' ideas or y'all's ideas. I'm still getting cross currents about, but you're comfortable with it on top of the 265 million that the governor laid out, plus 300 million, so 565 million in cuts from the Regents in fiscal 2011.
We don't have any choice. We have to balance the budget.
I wouldn't characterize it as comfortable, certainly not.
No.
There is no comfort level when you have to make that kind of cut.
You do have other choices, though, right? I mean, you can raise.
You can raise taxes on the rest of the state of Georgia. They may not be as appreciative of that either.
No, I absolutely agree, but you have other choices, right?
Certainly. I'm just saying I'm not comfortable with making the cuts either, but I'm not comfortable with raising taxes either.
We can raise taxes on groceries. How many people in Georgia in this room would even like to see grocery taxes raised? I guarantee you, I'm on the campaign trail for another office, and I don't hear anywhere I go folks want to have their taxes raised. And those types of taxes that we're hearing are the most insidious taxes because they hit the people who are most unable to pay them. Your welfare parent does not pay taxes, but the working poor does. And if we raise the sales tax on food and groceries, what does that do? That impacts directly those folks that are the working poor, that are right above welfare. They're right above there, and they're the ones that get hit and hammered with this thing.
I've got to run.
All right, we are. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.